this chart in on Saturday morning because I was so fed up with journalists asking me, so what does the NBN mean to my video, that this was a tongue-in-cheek chart. And I really, really like the message that this chart delivers. I made this about in 2001 or 2002, I think. What this says is that back when dial-up modems were around, and I had at that time, and right at the beginning of this chart, a 300 bit per second modem. Now there were ones around before that that were only 110, but I started this chart from 300. At that time, there was an ability to make video digitally, but there was no ability to compress it using MPEG technologies that were invented sometime later. Now, with an uncompressed DVD, and remember DVDs didn't exist then, so this is a bit hypothetical, but an uncompressed DVD back then, when I had a 300 bit per second modem, would have taken 800,000 hours to deliver over a network. Not exactly what you'd call practical. And you'll notice that this curve is on an exponential graph, and it's, you know, you can do an extrapolation which shows this is pretty much a straight line going to the right bottom corner. And I've updated this a number of times over the last 5 or 6 years just for fun, and it's continuing down this path. Now, the reason this matters is not that, oh good, now I can get onto BitTorrent and get a movie in a couple of seconds. That's not the point. The point is, now that I can get content much, much faster than I can view it, I now will pay much more attention to getting it from the cloud every time I want it, rather than thinking that I need it in my own home environment or on my own device. And in fact, we already see lots and lots of trends that show consumers consuming content off the network every time they want it, rather than getting a copy for themselves and using it domestically, if you like. Facebook is one of the best examples of this. In fact, last year, 2/3 of the way through last year, social networking overtook what I would call anti-social networking as the biggest source of traffic on the network. And the anti-social networking is probably more around the pornography and things that we all have been told over the last 15 or 20 years was the driver behind the growth of the internet. Well, in fact, last year, it's now social media driving that growth. And in fact, one of the dimensions of that is that when you share a photo or a video or any form of rich media on Facebook, it's in the cloud, and every time somebody, one of your friends, wants to view it, they download it again and again and again. And I have adult children who've grown up with broadband, of course, so their view is the only place you put photos when a friend gets married is on Facebook. So there's 2,000 photos of a wedding on Facebook. Well, think about how much data that is. That's a couple of gigabytes of data. And they don't want, they have no interest in having a copy of those photos in their own hands. All they need to know is that they can get access to that whole 2,000 photos on Facebook, plus the other 2,000 photos that all of the people who attended that wedding put on their sites to expand that experience. A completely different model. So what I think is extremely important about this graph is, yes, the networks are getting bigger and better, and compression in all its forms is getting better and better as well. But now you can download content so quickly if you've got the capability that this graph is representing. Then you no longer even need to think about, well, where am I going to store it, where am I going to back it up? These services will be entirely cloud-based, which makes the network a fundamental part of everything we do in our business and our life. And of course, this just is way pointing towards the importance of some of the so-called cloud-related things. And all this diagram is trying to illustrate is, from the beginnings of computing, there was this centralised appliance kind of model, which became a client-server model, which became a personal computing and a trusted applications model, and all of that was the domain of an IT manager in the company or the family geek in the private environment. And we all have lived through that model of using and gradually being affordable PCs and things in our consumer life as well as our business life. But in fact, this inflection point that emerges is around getting access to any application, anywhere, at any time. And I know we've all heard and talked about that a great deal over the last few years, and that's the wonderful characteristic of smart devices that we can put in our pocket or in our briefcase. But that shift is pretty profound because it moves a lot of the requirements out of the IT department and into the hands of the device manufacturers and the application creators. In fact, in many examples now, IT departments are being directed by CEOs to do such radical things as, well, we're not going to give that new employee a standard company phone and a standard company computer. What we're going to do is increase their package by a couple of grand and tell them to buy whatever they like. And if they do, and they don't buy something from our standard collection of goodies, their support's their own problem. And many people are very relaxed about the support being their own problem because they know that their social environment will solve a problem far quicker than the IT guy will. There's already plenty of evidence to support that. So it's a really interesting evolution towards this model. I often like to reflect on what people describe as mobile devices because I think it's such a badly used term. Many of you probably have iPhones, and many of you probably send a lot of texts with your iPhones, and you use the messaging app that's on your phone. You may notice that sometimes those messages are in blue and sometimes they're in green. Well, that green one is using the old SMS infrastructure that comes with the telephone network. The blue one is an entirely end-to-end IP connection to another smart device, not using SMS at all. But the application is making the decision about that. So you, with your device and your app, that messaging app on that phone, is making a decision about what's the available network to use and using the most effective one. You, as a consumer of that messaging system, play no role in that decision. And that's, in fact, I think, a bit of a model that we will see increasingly important. And in fact, a plug for tomorrow's presentation, that's sort of the starting point for many of the things I want to show you in the CSIRO kit bag. Another indication of one of the things that will happen over time is if we reflect on where we are today, back in 2013, how insignificant our data usage is compared to what is potentially forecast for the next 30 or 40 years. And in fact, I pinched this graph from a company called Alcatel-Lucent, who's supplying a lot of the technology to NBN Co for fibre to the home technology, and Telstra and other players all over the world. And in fact, they did a lot of scenario planning, modelling work to think about the amount of infrastructure that would be needed in an NBN kind of model. And this is just one of the many outputs from their work. And I got permission to do this because I used to work there and was responsible for this work, so I was able to extract a little bit of it when I left. This was a medium-level scenario of the sort of traffic growth. And you'll see that education and e-health start to play a significant measurable role over time. Many of the e-health and education dimensions here don't require a huge amount of bandwidth. What they do require is an enormous amount of connectivity to people and places, no matter where they are, to make these services viable. And what this chart is really trying to allude to is that in a fairly conservative mid-range scenario, 1.3 terabytes a month is what an average home in Australia will likely consume. And that is not, oh yeah, that's just 1 in 100 people. That is the average in this scenario. And that is staggering when you think about where we are today. But I can show you other graphs which would show you considerably more than that if you just take one or two slightly different assumptions about take-up rates of some of the services that we foresee, particularly in health and education, and not just the impact of video-related services, but clearly video in one form or another, or entertainment-based services, are very important to the amount of traffic that will flow in networks. And the other dimension of this, of course, is that video is invading the business space just as quickly as it is the entertainment space. So when we talk about video on the net, please don't for a moment think I'm only degenerating this back to the conversation about faster and faster movie downloads. This is about real business. And in fact, my friend Peter, who gave that quick video demonstration during the morning tea break, is just another great example of business video. And there are many, many more of them. And in fact, tomorrow I'll show you some incredibly high bandwidth versions of that as well. And this is another indication of where Australia is at. This is an attempt at creating a barometer for Australian business. So this was as a result of a lot of interviews with a lot of people right across large business and small business in large cities and in small towns. A pretty typical collection of respondents to this, and it was quite a detailed telephone survey for people in business who are actually involved in either leading an organisation or the strategy associated with the business or whatever. And what this tries to show, and unfortunately this is supposed to be a single vertical collection of things, but it wouldn't fit on the chart that way. So it starts with less sophisticated services on the bottom right-hand corner, and the yellow flows into the blue and keeps going up to the most sophisticated services in purple. And what we determined when we were looking at this work a while ago was that, yeah, almost every business, very high percentages of course, are using email and are doing some of these basic, less sophisticated services. But as you get more into the domain of really rich leverage of social media in business and the use of very high quality video collaboration kind of capabilities, even things like sophisticated energy management and monitoring tools, the percentages are much, much lower. And in fact, I think what this is really illustrating is that you know, we're down in this green section right now dealing with, I guess, the evolution from a horse and cart to a pretty fast car. But what we're really talking about up in the top left-hand corner is a set of services that will become just as fundamental to the businesses as any other traditional part. We've got a fair way to go. And in fact, the innovation around services is going to be where a great deal of the action and entrepreneurial behaviour is in the digital economy. And there'll be so many new services and so many new service models. We will be so overwhelmed with choices that there'll be a whole industry, a services industry around helping us choose the services, I suspect. And that all might sound ridiculous and very complicated, but the very notion that we are shifting from an industry, pick any industry, with a relatively simple business model and see that extrapolated forward to an environment where we will have dozens, if not hundreds of model choices for that industry, it will be difficult to navigate in some ways. Now, one of the wonderful things that the NBN does is that it gives every Australian very, very, very good quality connectivity. That's really opening a floodgate, but it's opening a floodgate that is bi-directional. So Australia can be a target for service delivery from any other market, just as well as Australia can be a net exporter of services to any other market. And once again, I'll talk more about some of these services that we're doing in CSIRO, but there are some really wonderful examples of sophisticated agricultural services that could be globally sourced out of Australia very, very soon, once some science is matured. But if we don't accelerate that process of exporting that technology, we will be a net receiver of it from some other country that had the foresight to take that particular smart piece of agricultural capability and bring it into Australia instead of us exporting it. And I think that's one of the really interesting challenges when we start talking to business about digital economy, is that there is really a desire by all CEOs in every business, no matter what their sector, to say, oh yeah, we've got that under control. I mean, that's the ego of the CEO will always say, yeah, we thought about that already, we're well on the path. And not really realising